Hey there. What's up again, my friends? How y'all doing? Well, shoot, I just wanted to start this video because I made one previously, and I ran out of time. And it seems like whenever I have something that I really get into, I run out of time. Um, it's funny. The human hearing is very, very distinct. I have this drum sitting up there, and I can hear my voice bouncing off it once again, even though it's like mounted on the wall. So I'm going to put it down there. So what's up? I wanted to talk about stress for a minute because I am definitely an expert on stress and de-stressing. I hate to say it. I know. I'm just an expert at everything, right? No, I'm really not. I know a lot of shit, but a lot of it's more or less just useless. We all learn a lot of things that are useful in life, and then we all learn a lot of things that aren't useful that maybe we just want to know as basic knowledge. But the more useless knowledge we learn, the more useful it becomes. And that might not make sense, but take, for example, learning that a grape takes a certain amount of time to ripen. That may be useless knowledge to you for the rest of your life. But if you become a vintner and you decide to make wine, you can add that to your knowledge base and make better wine. In other words, that knowledge becomes useful in the right context. So when people talk about useless knowledge, they fail to recognize sometimes that it's not useless for all people. That, for you, knowing how to tie a shoe may be important. For somebody with Velcro, maybe it's not. And so anyway, along that path of learning what's useful and what's not useful, there's one thing I've found that is absolutely, essentially useful for every single person. That it's not trivial. That it's not... It's de-stressing. It's not allowing yourself to be consumed by daily bullshit. And the path to do this is very complicated, and that's why I don't talk about it. Being one of the most important things to me, not stressing, this is due to many obvious factors that we know that it causes bad health. And as I mentioned previously in the video, it's people who have herpes, it can lay dormant for years until a stressful time. What does that say about the disease? That means viruses are more active when you are stressed. And that should be an important thing for people to realize. If the herpes virus is activated when you're stressed, what other viruses are activated or allowed to flourish? This is why we get sick when we stress. And it's easy for people to say, hey, don't stress, man. But, for a person who is stressed out, it's a lot more complicated. About 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, I was kind of having a moment where I felt panicked in my life. I guess maybe it was a little longer ago now, but I went to the doctor and said, hey, I'm stressing, and I figured they'd blow me off like they do everybody, and they did, of course. They gave me some Klonopin for short term, and then this stuff called buspirone, which gave me these strange brain zaps, but didn't really seem to help with the stress. And I can't believe that recently in my life, even 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I was that willing to give up on using my own mind. And I was willing to take a drug to ease that. And even though I enjoy taking substances in my life, I don't do any of it to de-stress. I'm not a drinker. I smoke cannabis, but that hardly helps a person de-stress. Maybe for a while, but it tends to help me think a little more deeper into things, and it can cause more of a panic than it's worth. So there's really no reprieve from the daily stresses that we have unless we, drug ourselves into a stupor or learn to harness and conquer those fears and that anxiety. So what we have to do is get to the root of what makes us anxious. And it comes, usually into these conversations, I end up getting into death and just bringing it right out and saying, if you're anxious about dying, then, you're like everybody else to an extent. But if you think that you're not anxious about dying, but you're anxious about other things, I would ask, why are you anxious about a paper that's due if you're not even anxious about your own death and demise? And it gets into some philosophical and religious concepts. It becomes very difficult to talk about because some people say, well, I'm going to heaven. I don't care what happens now. Or, another person may say, hey, we should just live and get everything we can while we're here. And everyone has different views about what this life means. But no matter how you look at it or what your religious views are, everyone can agree that stress is something that is not helpful to us unless it's something that motivates us to change or do better. So if you're stressing about a project you're working on, that might be natural stress to make sure that you get it done properly. However, you have to conquer that, realizing that stress actually produces cortisol and clouds your judgment, does many things to the body. So you're compromising the integrity of your immune system, and your mind is being clouded because you are in fight or flight. And that is a fact. You can't think as clearly when you're angry or when you're frightened. Your only impulse is to get away from it. And I think in society we kind of have an attachment to that, to just blowing stuff off, because it's too scary to us or whatnot. But at the same time, obsessing over stupid things that really don't matter that much. And, if you're still worried about somebody cutting you off in traffic 5 hours after it happened, you probably have a problem with anxiety. And I would say that because when folks talk about things such as the way a cashier treated them at the store, or they had trouble getting their gas cap off, or I could think of a million other things, lost their favorite pen, you just got to say shit happens. I've lost so much stuff, left things behind. I left my favorite bubbler, glass pipe, like at this event, and I'm like, oh well, just let it go. It's all just stuff. It doesn't matter. It's not worth thinking about and putting energy into worrying about something you can't change. And too many people do it. And it's important to talk about it because our judgment is clouded by stupid fears. Oh man, dare I get into the Illuminati conspiracies? I was a sucker for a while. In '98, I read Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper. I became obsessed with the Illuminati, with the banking cartels, with chemtrails. Everything that you hear on YouTube now, I was obsessed with before YouTube even existed. So once it became more clear that other people were into it and I started researching it further, I started getting my facts straight. And at the same time, I found that a lot of it was BS, a lot of it was true, but didn't matter. And those are important key factors. If it's BS, it's not worth paying attention to. If it's something that you can't change, or let's say this is what the Illuminati did in the 1785 or something, it doesn't matter now. It may seem like it should matter because, people say, well, you need to be aware of what's going on. And I would say, why? What is there to be aware about if it's something you can't do anything about? And I think it's important because many of these conspiracies, the people who are into them, they don't realize that the fear and anxiety that they have is disguising itself as excitement, okay? And I know I can't speak for everyone, but I think a lot of people, if they really stopped and looked at what their excitement, and I'm talking about the person who gets on YouTube first thing in the morning and uses particular search words, because a lot of people do this, and it should tell you a lot about what kind of things you're interested in, obviously. And if a person Googles Illuminati, Jews, conspiracy, media, lies, frenzy, all these things every day, then they're only going to find the people who are catering to that. And then their entire feed and subscriptions list and their watch recommended list, everything's going to be filled up with this stuff. And they are going to be in the reality that this is what everybody's into. And this is how the internet shapes opinions, because we think that everyone's into the same thing until we unsubscribe to all those channels and stop watching them and realize that really nobody is talking about many of these things. I'm not going to even single out particular ones because there's always going to be somebody who will say, no, that one's true. Like with chemtrails, I don't deny that there is cloud seeding going on. I don't deny that there's been military use of chaff and barium, perhaps, for communications, but I do not believe that every persistent contrail is a chemtrail. I've observed and researched and documented weather conditions, and I over a period of a year, just so I could make sure of what I was seeing. And, sometimes it does take getting out and getting our hands dirty and actually getting our asses in gear to do our own homework and own research to see if something's worth fearing. And the reason I bring chemtrails up is because I really could care less if a person wants to believe that they're being poisoned from the sky. But I talked to one guy a couple of years ago who I saw a comment, and he said, I keep my kids in on chemtrail days. I don't let them play outside. And that is probably the one comment that inspired me to speak out about chemtrails, or the lack of evidence that they are damaging or chemical in nature. And we know that a contrail 30,000 feet up in the sky is not going to instantly fall out of the sky. It's going to blow to the east or the west, and it will probably fall over an area where there isn't air traffic, which is usually on less populated areas. I mean, these are just things that I see on the West Coast. I'm not going to say that people in Colorado or Nevada or elsewhere don't have different things going on. And a lot of these places have military bases nearby, and perhaps they're testing things. I don't know. But when it becomes a worldwide fear of contrails, and a person's not letting their kids go outside, I think that's a big problem and something we need to address. Because it's the same fear, and it reminds me of the kids who, in the 60s, their parents wouldn't let them buy an Elvis album, because they were afraid that it was going to corrupt the youth. And then in the 80s, the big fear of Satanism. And then all the kids were worshiping the devil because of the heavy metal music. And then, they would draw pentagrams in caves. I grew up in the 80s. You'd always see pentagrams drawn on bridges and in tunnels and party areas. The kids didn't know what the hell it meant. I was a teenager. I thought that Slayer, the band, was actually devil worshippers. I used to listen to Slayer all the time, and I was never into Satan or any of that, but I thought, whoa, these guys are into, some hardcore shit. Of course they weren't. They were putting on an act, just like everybody else. And so that's the thing. We got to realize a lot of people are putting on an act, and this includes a lot of these people who are spreading fear and who are spreading anxiety through the fear that people don't even realize they're causing it. And when I'm going to say unsubscribe, metaphorically and literally, to negativity in your life. But it doesn't mean that you have to ignore what's going on. I consider myself politically neutral. I don't take a side. I'm not left or right wing. I've seen both sides have their positive attributes. But I also realize that for the most part I lean left, because conservatives are, for the most part, their values and what they stand for and their actual mission statement, if you care to go look at it, does not resonate with mine. So I think that abandoning politics, as far as the whole anxiety that goes along with it, is really important, because we have no reason to get anxious about it, but we should get worked up and make a difference if we can. But it's not worth fearing and weakening our immune systems over. And I think this goes for everything. I don't know how I could ever put it in a way that could define, how people should go about this, because I don't know. I don't even know how I did it. I'm still working on it. It's like a constant work in progress, trying to figure out how to get rid of these little things in life that bother us. But I don't have any fear in my life. Once in a while I might get a letter from the IRS telling me I owe taxes. And I'm like, oh. Or maybe I'd find out that, my wife calls out of the blue the other day, actually, and her car had broken down on the freeway. And she was panicked. My phone wasn't working, or I didn't have it on me, so when I finally got back to it, I kind of heart jumped a minute, and I was like, okay, calm, just remain calm. There's a book, it's called Deep Survival. And I can't remember who wrote it, but there's an audiobook version of it, which my brother gave me a copy of a while back. And Deep Survival is a narrated, it's basically a man telling stories about pilots in the war. He was in the military, and he saw a lot of how people can panic, such as they've found people underwater, divers who have pulled their mask off and actually inhaled water because they wanted to take a breath so bad and they couldn't figure out why. Or pilots that had, made really bad decisions when they were, under stress or in panic. And the whole premise of the book is about how to remain calm in the face of adversity. And I found it to be a fascinating story, even though I only listened to the audiobook maybe a couple times and haven't really listened to it in a few years. I think that many of the things I learned there stuck with me. And another one I'll attribute to my de-stressing would be people like Manly P. Hall, who, or even Alan Watts would be even a better example of ways to de-stress. Manly was a little more intense, but Alan Watts is fun. A lot of people think of him as kind of a shallow shallow Zen philosophy kind of pseudo nonsense stuff, because he's just like, fly away. He doesn't play games. I should say, all he does is plays games, because he doesn't try to put on really an act other than just knowing that he's kind of a quack, and not a quack in a bad way. Just he's a goofy guy. He was a goofy guy, and I find him fascinating. I have some of his videos uploaded on my channel, and I think that there's two types of responses to him. Either people aren't ready to be playful about life, and so they think that he's just too jokey or too silly, or people take life so damn seriously that they almost envy him or scoff at him because he can take life so not seriously when they're struggling to survive and they're trying to make their paychecks, and oh man, some of us have to work for a living, and you know the type. The ones who always have to tell you, well, it's about working harder. The dads that want to get their kids working double jobs by the time they're 12 so they can make something of themselves. Go out there and get them. Go get the world. And the kid grows up and says, I don't want that shit. I just want to be happy, I guess times are changing. I mean, it's not always been... We really thought that the American dream was about getting ahead, And we did try. We tried the American dream. We tried the white picket fence, and, the flowers on the windowsill, and, the nuclear family with 2 children. And we got ourselves into a mess because we realized that it's not about... It's the stress that we cause ourselves by wanting more. And in this credit-based, credit-driven society, which is monetarily and very superficial and as well very materialistic, it's easy to think that all people are that way, but we're not. Because you and I are, if you're watching this video this long, you probably know where I'm coming from to an extent. If you're a kind of person who would rather stress and is materialistic, then you probably have already turned it off. So in that sense, I guess you can probably understand where I'm coming from when I say that that stuff brings us more stress than it's worth. There's no amount of stuff you can gain that will make you happy. And that's coming from a guy who has come and gone with having money and come and gone with having stuff. I've never really had a lot of money, but I'm just, at the times when I made a little more, like when I was a carpenter before my back blew out, there was a time when I was making $40 an hour and working full time, and that was good for me. And that was tax-free at the time because I hadn't paid my taxes. I ended up paying the price on that one. But my wife and I were both making really good money at the time, and I ended up buying more stuff. It wasn't more things that I needed. It was just better things than I had. We tried to get another car, but I still only spent a couple grand. I've always been very frugal because I don't want the anxiety that comes with having a car and having to make payments on a car or leasing a car. And so my sample, or rather my example, I guess, of how to live stress-free would be to don't take things so seriously and realize that life is a fun game and think of it that way, and don't let your things control you, because they will. If you have a lot of money, you're going to be more likely to want to have more money. It's a fact. Not every person is that way, but this seems to be a common theme where, let's put it this way, if you've got 5 ones in your pocket, you have no problem going in and buying a candy bar. But if you have a $100 bill, you go into the store, you don't want to buy anything. You don't want to break that 100. Why? It's not just because they don't have change. Of course they do. It's because you want to build more. Once you get to 1,000, once you get to 10,000, which is probably the most I've ever had in my life, was like 8,000 or something saved up, and then I ended up having to blow it all on, some emergencies, and whatever. It comes and goes. I felt so much better not having it because I didn't need that stress. So I would say that there's a certain amount of money that we have to be happy. And there's a certain amount of work that we have to be happy. Because if you're working too hard, you're going to stress yourself out. And you're not even going to realize it. And if you're missing your life and you're missing your family because you're trying to work to provide for them, there is absolutely no point in continuing that type of lifestyle, in my opinion. If you're gone and you're only home one day a week, or you only come home for a couple hours in the evening because you're working so hard so you can afford the house and all these things, but you're never home with your kids and your wife. It just doesn't make sense to me. And on the other hand, if we don't work at all, it can stress us out even more, of course. And that's because even if we have the money to survive and we're not working, let's say a person on disability or a person that's collecting welfare, most of those people don't want to be broke and don't want to not be working. A lot of them do, but a lot don't. And I think for the most part, we want to feel like we've accomplished something in life. So part of de-stressing is acknowledging that and realizing that there's a certain amount of work that we want to do, and there's only a certain amount of money that we need to survive, and anything beyond that just becomes a liability, in a sense. I think that we can all de-stress a little bit by just letting shit go. That's my opinion. I guess I can't speak for the people who have a lot of family drama, because I understand that can be very stressful. And that's one thing that I should probably mention before I finish this, and it's a very crucial point, which is that people who have stress thrown in their faces don't often have a chance not to be stressed, such as a verbally abusive spouse, or a parent or a child who is in the hospital or hurt, or you're anxious because your kids aren't doing well or something happened to them. All these different things can bring you stress. But I'll tell you, I have 3 kids. My 2 youngest are 3 and 7, and they can be a nightmare. Sometimes I have to raise my voice and scream. I do it at the last resort, but when I do, they listen, but I don't like doing it. I hate it. But the thing I've realized is that along with that scream, I don't have this wave of anger or hang on to it. I do it because I need to teach them. It's just like a mother barking at her pups, keeping the kids in line, because that's what we do as parents. But I can see how people could get really stressed out by their kids, but don't let it consume you, and realize that they're just kids, and that once they're gone and they're grown up, you won't have another chance to make an impression on how to deal with that anger. So remaining cool and calm and collected is very important, and it's not always easy to do, but we do try. So peace and love and namaste and all that stuff, and I'll talk to you